Support for independent candidates in this year's local government elections has grown. Independents have secured 1.75% of the total vote. That translates to 51 municipal seats compared to 2016 when they got only 27 seats. While smaller parties also saw an expansion in support, growing by 5.48%. With the number of seats then, one increasing from 195 in 2016 to 619 in this year's voting. To talk more on this, we're joined by political analyst Sanusha Naidu, live for us tonight from Cape Town. Sanusha, good to see you. So this growth in support for independence, how much power and influence does it buy them in their respective councils, given that they are not necessarily a party, a unit?
Yeah. Good evening, Jim Bakila and viewers. I think it's not going to be the kind of big power that we normally associate with, like your Action SA or the new political parties that emerge on the scene. And of course, they come in with some really important trajectories in how they reshape and reconstitute the political landscape. But I think for independents, the numbers you quoted is very important. Over 1.7% of the vote is really important. That's a growth of about 0.61% from the last election. Having over 50 seats in councils across the country is very, very important as well, because I think their role is not necessarily, their role is something that is linked to the way the community saw them. Those that went out and voted for independence saw them as a political alternative. And we keep raising these debates about, is there alternative? In terms of what the electorate was looking for in the context of this election was to look at who best represents us in terms of the governance and the government of local spaces and in terms of municipalities. But I think what the role of independents are going to be, interestingly, going forward, is how they become the kind of interlocker for the community. So in those areas where they've done really well and they've gained seats and they've managed to become a important have a political space and a footprint, I think they become the interlocutors. For example, the community will be able to link up with them and have more kind of interaction in terms of what's happening in the council where these independents have won seats. Mm-hmm. And I think that gives you a little bit more traction to be the eyes and ears and the interlocker for the community. So I think that's an important thing that we need to start looking at in terms of how these independents will start to evolve in this landscape that's changing so rapidly.
And in this election, we've seen some independents take on an interesting approach with Musi Maimane, with the One SA movement, where they're basically grouping themselves. And mm-hmm. Yes, they're not a party, but there seems to be some kind of coordination to a degree. Are they stronger in that way?
Well, I think they definitely do have a way in which they can amalgamate their resources, coordinate, as you said, which is very important, because trying to contest an election on your own, particularly given how expensive elections are, and the fact that you can't you can't raise the money or the resources in terms of where you want to contest. I think what it does for me is that it gives them the ability to have that kind of architecture, to have the capabilities, the resources, to be able to find the way in which they are also being trained, or also being given the capacities to be capacitated around how to be a councillor, how to basically be in that space as an interlocker. And I think that's important, because sometimes these associations, etc., they have very specific mandates when they are an association, like a ratepayers association or something like that. And so, you kind of get the sense that they're signing this code of conduct, they're signing this kind of agreement of how do we want to conduct ourselves ethically, but also how do we stay true to the communities that voted for us.
And just on that point, Sanusha, I suppose there is to a degree often a misconception, perhaps a misunderstanding, because there's an assumption that independents are homogenous, and they're not. They come from different communities and have very different positions on public policy.
Indeed, and it's a very localized set of issues that they're taking forward. They're taking issues forward that are very linked in to their communities. So it could be about rates. It could be about the fact that in this community, it's about safety and security. In that community, it's about the fact that there's questions about how service delivery is happening in the context of roads and very, very localized, very kind of community-led processes, but community-led issues. And I think what the One SA movement does, which is quite interesting for me because it is a watching brief, is it actually brings these these associations together, but they can share experiences as well across the board because they'll be able to say, it's working here, but it's not working there. These are the difficulties we're encountering. But I think it also brings them closer to what the community wants, to stay true to this community that voted for them. So I think you're right. It's a heterogeneous set of actors. But I think at the end of the day, if they become the interlocutors between the community and the municipality, the community and the budgets, helping to explain, to basically demystify what happens in a municipality, it would be very important.
So just on that then, you mentioned something earlier about the cost of contesting. Politics is not cheap. Registration alone is quite expensive, and then you still have to campaign. You could argue it's cheaper for independents because, like you're saying, these are people who, in the true sense, would be campaigning in their immediate communities. But how much of a barrier is cost to a democratic process where, as we're seeing from the results this year, the public is increasingly disillusioned with the mainstream parties?
Elections are just, sometimes it's just so unrealistic in terms of how expensive it is, because it's not just about, I turn up or I basically go out there and I, talk to the community and then I have to basically contest. You've got to pay the IEC to contest, and you can't contest in all of the 213 councils. You can't contest across the national boundaries. You've got to basically be very clear, very coherent and specific about which community, where you're going to contest, as we see with some of the new parties that have come into our political landscape. They were very clear about that. But I think for these independents that are so grassroots aligned and linked, they will actually be much more about what's happening in those communities. It's about those communities and taking that to the council, to wherever they are, and they've done well. So I think that for me makes that grassroots direct participatory democracy much more engaging, and it gives communities the ability to find the civic space and to mobilize their political activism.
Sanusha Naidu, so great to be able to speak to you again. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Pleasure, and lovely to be on your show, Chambikile.
Political analyst Sanusha Naidu speaking to us from Cape Town tonight. In other news that are following, the Steenkamp family lawyer Tanya Koen says the parole board has had to cancel a